Hey everyone, it's Synth Designer back again with another video. Today we're going to be breaking down sounds of Lorde's pure Heroine. Now, these won't be exact replications of the synths behind there, but I'm going to kind of show you some of the principles behind them and show you how I did it through Diva's synthesizer. So I'm basically going to be using Diva exclusively here. You can follow along and try to recreate it on the synth of your choice, but I find that Diva helps make a lot of these sounds possible through its kind of like warm analog sounding synthesizer. I'm going to take you through 3 songs from the album. It's Tennis Court, Teams, and Glory and Gore. Now, these won't be exact replications like I said before. Some of the chords might be a little bit different sounding, but the principle behind it is what we're going to be after here. So why don't we get right into it here. So we're going to start off with looking at Lorde's Tennis Court here. And there's a few patterns here we're going to take a look at, and we're going to take a look at the drums a little bit here too. So starting off with pattern 1, we have this sound. Just that great warm sound, and that's one of the kind of trademarks of that album. Warm sounding, really highly filtered synthesizers. When the album came out, it was really quite different from a lot of the pop music you heard coming out. I mean, this album is just over 10 years old. And if you think about back to about 2011, 2013, we had a lot of really bright sounding synths, a lot of kind of upbeat music. I feel like this is one of those albums that really is the beginning of a new generation of music. Obviously, there was other artists at the time that sounded like it. There was Lana Del Rey, for example. But this one really put this type of synthesizer on the map, and just the types of sounds there were. It was a little bit darker, it was warmer, it wasn't as upbeat, and it really kind of changed how we think of synthesizers and what they can do. So taking a look at this one, you can really hear it has kind of that square vibe to it. Rather than a saw, which has a lot of kind of grit, I took that out and made it purely about the square here. So let's take a look here real quickly. The square here is the main waveform. I have no sawtooth here and no sub oscillator information. You can bring in the sub if you wanted to. However, I don't need that for this. I just wanted to focus on the synth, as well as I took out a lot of the lower information. So if you put the synthesizer or the switch here on boost, you have a lot more lower information. Cutoff here is right about in the middle, and I have an LP2 shape here. The other thing is, so envelope 1 here, we have that bit of attack, as you can hear, no sustain, and a decent amount of decay here, and some release there too as well. Envelope 2 has a little bit of a modification here. You can see the shape of the envelope here. If I were to just turn it to nothing, so you can see the differences that what happens here. So if I were to put on the plus side, it comes on and off really quickly because there's a decay here real quick. This is essentially a negative kind of version of it. So it kind of dips real quick and then comes up. You can hear it dipping more that way. However, aside from that, it's a pretty simple sound. There's not much to it here. And the other thing is I put in 2 effects. So the chorus really adds a lot. Chorus in Diva is almost necessary on a lot of sounds when you're trying to create a lot of width. For example, let's hear what happens when I take it off. It's really up the middle. Now it's really up on the sides. And then the plate reverb. adds that dimension to the end of the sound as well. So we have the first sound pretty much complete here. Let's take a look at this section here. So we're going to transition from this kind of verse into this chorus section, which has a few patterns. Okay, there's a little bit of a drum groove there too as well, but let's look at the patterns first. So we have pattern 4 here, and let's play that. Okay, and we have pattern 5, and let's play that. So we have patterns 4 and 5 here kind of complementing each other. Pattern 4 is purely the bass here, and pattern 5 is kind of like the top bass. In the song itself, you can really hear it's just driven by those two sounds. There's really not much aside from that. And that's another kind of trademark of that album. There's parts where there's just a bass and some drum grooves, and you can kind of extend out what you call the bass. There's like top bass parts, sub-information parts. In this case, we have kind of a distorted bottom end and that really kind of high gritty top end as well. So let's get into pattern 4 and the bottom end quickly here. So we open up another instance of Diva. Again, this is actually the same template here. What I like about Diva is you have a lot of template options. In this case, I really found that I wanted the same shape to continue. However, I just wanted to add grit and sub-information. So let's listen. Diva allows you to really kind of expand on different sounds with these templates. So as we saw before, we had the square, but what we added here is this sawtooth. Which adds that higher end grit. And then we actually added a lot of sub information here. It's kind of a pulse wave rather than just a square. And we have the boost down here. Cutoff is a little bit higher. And then we have a completely sustained envelope here. And envelope 2 is really not doing anything. Then I added a little chorus again, because in the song, the bass actually fills out a lot of information, and chorus will add kind of that dimension. Otherwise, it's right up the middle again. So it really fills out a ton of space. Pattern 5, on the other hand, adding a little bit more dimension to it as well. However, this one is a little bit more up the middle. And since there's no real pad outside of that bass information in the chorus there, I really just wanted to kind of group them together and get that big bassy type of sound. In this case, I have just the mix on VCO1. So this is a different template as you see, and it's purely a saw wave here. So as you can see, the mix here is turned all the way to VCO1, which makes it purely on this one here. And you can see it's actually down 12 semitones. You can turn it up. Cutoff again is kind of towards the middle. And we have that soft attack to it again with no envelope modulation. Real quickly, let's just actually take a look. Pattern 5, I have this kind of harmony here. So I have the fifth of each note. And then pattern 4, I just have kind of the bass notes. But let's listen to them together. So one really adds a little bit more of the kind of dimension, the reverb, the top end. The other one adds tons of grit and lower end information. So those two really are meant to be kind of a complement to each other, and they are the driving force behind kind of the chorus rather than any kind of pads or anything like that. Then lastly, I just want to look at the drums here because there's a very particular type of drum sound in that album. And it has a lot to do with kind of big spacious claps and kind of reverbed kick drums. And here's how pattern 2 sounds on its own. And then we'll play pattern 3 right after. Now pattern 3. And another part of the importance of the drums here is the kick isn't a straight 4 on the floor or anything like that. Because there's a lot of minimalism in this album, I feel like the groove of the kick drum adds a ton of information here. Just taking a quick look, here's pattern 3, for example. I have this kind of cool pattern here. In this instance, I didn't add any kind of processing to the drums because I just wanted to leave them as is. But I did want to show you some of the layers here. So we have this hi-hat here. Then we have the snare layered with this clap. And then we have a lot of different kind of other elements here. There's these shakers that come in every once in a while. This kind of percussive drop, as it's called. It's kind of like a wood block. And then this little kind of rim shot here. It just adds so many different kind of variations. And I forgot one important thing is this big clap that I add every once in a while. Because if you add it every single time there's a snare and a clap, it's really going to kind of feel like it's overwhelming, especially since it has such a long tail to it. But adding it every once in a while really adds a kind of cool effect to the drums. So that's that. So let's move on to Teams here. Teams is another amazing song from the album. It has that kind of string kind of section, that synth, along with great synthesizers and kind of a grittiness to it as well. And just another great drum groove. So let's just listen to it all the way through, and then we'll talk about the synthesizers and the drums once more. Okay, so let's get into that kind of stringy synthesizer for pattern 1 here. Once again, we're in Diva, and you can see we're on the same template as we were just on. However, this one's mixed a little bit differently. Because it's a main synthesizer, not a bass, I have a couple of important changes here. So number 1, we're utilizing both of the oscillators here. The first one is more prominent than the second one. However, the second one does come in. As you can hear, has that nice warm sound to it. And it doesn't last for too long. I made specifically last that long because I felt like it matched the song really well. Oscillator 1, the nice thing about Diva is you can layer or stack, I should say, the wave shapes. So right now it's on both the saw and the triangle. You could add this kind of pulse as well, or some noise. So you can really stack them and it really kind of creates nice blended types of sounds. This one here is just the triangle here, or just the saw, I should say. And then again, this has a nice high pass feature here. And I have high passed some of this information because we have bass coming up. And then we have this cutoff. Again, think about the warmer kind of sounds. However, I did click on this 12 dB. Usually it's on 24. Cuts out too much of the highs, I think. I felt like we needed a little bit more of those highs. For the envelope here, check out how much attack there is. It's really a slow attack. No sustain, and then some decay here. Some release as well. And then I have a nice plate reverb and some delay, as you can hear. You can hear the delay there. Kind of bouncing back and forth. So that's the essence of that sound, that really kind of stringy sound. Let me play it an octave above. It's really in that range that really has that kind of string-like sound. And this really goes with any type of synthesizer. If you really want those airy kind of strings, it has a lot to do with a cutoff and a saw and kind of mixing in the saw and the triangles, as well as a decent attack, because the attack is really what makes kind of a string sound what it is. Without the attack, it sounds very plucky and kind of not much like a string or orchestra sound. Moving on here, let's take a look at this section here, and let's play pattern 2. And pattern 4. So again, I did this kind of top layer, bottom layer bass type of thing. Again, there's so many of these songs that have that prominent bass line. Very simple here, but very effective and very kind of filling of the song. Just without the drums, let's just listen to all the synths here. So it really kind of fills out the entire kind of frequency spectrum with those high strings, the top bass and the bottom bass. So let's take a look at pattern 2, which is that top bass. We have a new template here, and taking a look here, we have the volume of oscillator 1, which is a saw wave, kind of halfway up, and then volume 2 is about, let's call it a third of the way up for oscillator 2, which is a square. So it's a mostly saw wave type of sound, but with some square to it. You can really hear kind of that square coming in. Let's listen just the saw. The square really adds a nice little bit of a bottom, but I didn't want too much of it just because this is meant to be more of a top. I didn't want all like bottom end. I also have this one actually down another octave versus this one, as you can see here. And then very simple here. The cutoff is a little bit higher because I wanted more of that top end information coming through. Still cut off because a lot of the higher frequency is done by that first synthesizer. Then a little bit of chorus here. Don't want it straight up the middle. And not much to talk about in terms of envelopes here other than the simplicity of it. Pattern 4 here. We go back to the template from the previous song. This time I have it on more of a pulse here, and I have this sawtooth coming in and a lot of sub information. This is basically purely a sub. Well, I shouldn't say purely a sub. There is upper frequencies here, but this is acting as kind of that sub, and that's a lot to do with the cutoff here. Again, simple type of envelope. It's really meant to be a sustained sound, and that's characteristic of that song. Lastly, let's take a look at pattern 3, which is the drums. And the drums really here are processed a little bit, and we're going to take a look at how I did it. So I have 2 distinct kicks here. One is meant to be kind of that bottom end, and here we have the top. And I have them processed just because I wanted reverb. And believe me, I know you're supposed to kind of put them on one bus and group them and have the reverb all under one kind of mix track, but for the sake of simplicity, I wanted to keep it brief here. And that is a huge characteristic of this album, is that kind of reverby drum sound, especially even in the kick drums. And as you can hear, those layered claps. Let's take a look at them. We got one here, two, and they're, as you can see, they're all different a little bit. I have one slightly before, and I actually did this within the piano roll. As you can see, it's slightly before. It's not as dramatic as it makes it look on the channel rack. And then we have this one and a little bit of a snare. So I kind of blended them all in a different way, and I used some EQ here to accentuate this one. I just wanted that top end, and really I wanted it wider as well, so I accentuated the sides here. Aside from that, a little bit of EQ on this one as well, cutting out some of the highs. Because you can hear it's a lot fatter. Nothing else. If I was producing this song completely, then of course I would EQ everything. I would kind of make sure everything is lined up perfectly. You want to have some sounds right up the middle, some kind of on the sides, and that's really what makes for a great layered clap. But the principle is here. We want that kind of kick drum with some reverb, and we want that big clap. So let's just play this chorus one more time before we finish off and get an idea of how it all sounds together. Okay, lastly we have Glory and Gore. Now there's a few little elements here. The drums are pretty simple, but it kind of takes a huge shift in the chorus. So let's just listen to this all the way through. So we have those kind of filtered sounds at the beginning and that really gritty kind of bass sound that comes in the chorus that is just huge and carries that thing. So let's take a look at patterns 1 and 2 to begin. So let's start off with pattern 1. And as you can tell by this playlist here, this is going to be the chords. So let's take a look at them here. We're back on the Jupe 6. So we have a combination here of actually a triangle and a pulse, and then a triangle here in number 2. As you can hear, it's not as gritty as some of the sounds we heard before, and that has to do with the fact that we don't have any saw waves here. If we had some saw waves here, and I want to keep in a little bit of that lower frequency while cutting off some. There's a lot of heavy lifting done by the sub here in pattern 2, but I want to keep a little bit of that low information. A little bit of a modulation in envelope 2 here. As you can see, it has a quicker attack than some of the ones that we heard before. It's not a really powerful kind of like in-your-face transients at the start, but still has a quicker attack. Again here, low pass 2, just because I don't want to cut off too much of the higher frequencies with a low pass 4. And the cutoff again is just past the middle, wanted that warmth again. Again, let's take a look at chorus and plate here. They're doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of getting that spaciousness. Nice sound to it, but really mono sounding. So I really wanted some spaciousness, and that adds with the chorus and the plate. Quickly over to pattern 2. We have another instance of Diva, of course. This time I'm using the Mongrel 1 here, and this is purely a sine. Let's listen to it. And as you can tell, it's a very basic sub. We really don't need to get too much into this. It's a very similar in terms of attack here to the other synth, and it's purely as a sub bass, nothing else. The real main attraction here, I would say, is that pattern 5 here, where we have that really, really gritty bass that drives the chorus here. So let's take a look at that. Let's listen into this thing on its own, maybe. Just an amazing sound. This one, I feel like, was really tough to get right. I did a lot of tweaking here, and I felt like this is the best I could do in terms of keeping it true to the album. Obviously, like I said at the beginning, this is not a complete recreation of the album or any of the sounds. It's just kind of getting the principles behind it down. So let's take a look. The great thing about this template is that it has a triple VCO here. So we have 3 options here that we can use, and I'm utilizing all of them here. So number 1, another great thing is you can really toggle between these sounds here and get really kind of a tweener sound between, let's say, a saw and a triangle here. In this case, I wanted a square. In this case, I wanted something close to a triangle, but I've a little bit of a square information as well. So you can really get some interesting sounds here. I have this triangle up an octave here. I really feel it's giving those upper harmonics a little bit of interesting dimension to it. So as you can see, that's the most prominent sound, and then these two are kind of equal here. The square and the triangle are adding a little bit of, the square and the saw here are adding a little bit of more information here. The saw is going to be that grit, and the square is going to be that kind of really nice bottom end. Both of these are at the normal level here, the normal octave, and through the notes is essentially how I made a sub bass. The cutoff here is much more open than you would see in a lot of basses, but again, it's driving the sound. There's no other synths, and because of that, we have a lot of power and upper harmonics that are needed to kind of add more grit to the sound. Also, you can see here it's on a 24 dB filter. Let's play it and toggle that and see the difference. I just felt that 12 dB was too much of those higher frequencies, and I wanted more of the low end coming through. But that's about it here. Pattern 3 is just a simple drum here. I really didn't do too much to it, other than, of course, add some reverb and a layered clap and snare, but we really don't need to get into that. But I really hope that you enjoyed this video. I really love that album. I think it's one of my favorite pop albums for sure. It just turned 10 not too long ago. It's hard to believe at this point that it's already over 10 years old, but it's really an important album for kind of not only pop music, but sound design in a lot of ways. It really introduced us to kind of more of the spectrum of what synthesizers could do. And here are just a few really quick examples that I showed you. Obviously, they were not using Diva, but I felt like Diva was an appropriate synthesizer or digital synthesizer to show you guys how you can make these sounds. Let me know in the comments if you like this video and if you want to see more of these types of kind of breakdowns of just the philosophy of the sounds behind some great albums of the past or any of the current artists as well. Hopefully I'll have time to make more of them, but in the meantime, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time.